The hall of the Galactic Council was filled with hundreds of voices, each belonging to a leader of a different world. Strange shapes sat in high seats, wings folded, scales shining, or soft, translucent bodies glowing faintly. They had gathered, as they always did, to discuss trade routes, border disputes, and laws that stretched across the stars. It was supposed to be another long, boring session, but the humans had chosen this moment to change everything. Earth's ambassador stood up in silence. For years, humans had spoken last, often ignored while the stronger races made decisions. But this time, the ambassador's posture was different. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. He did not wait for his turn. He walked to the center platform, every step echoing through the chamber. The voices quieted, curious. The humans had never interrupted before. He pressed a small device. His words, simple and sharp, translated into every language at once. From this day forward, humanity cuts all ties with the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The words rang across the chamber like a thunderclap. For a moment, silence fell, complete silence in a hall that had never once been silent in its history. Hundreds of eyes, thousands of strange pupils turned toward the human. Some blinked in disbelief. Some laughed nervously. Others froze, unable to process what had just been said. The ambassador gave no explanation, no negotiation, not even anger in his voice. Only calm, final words. Then, without bowing, without a farewell, he walked back to his seat, picked up his case, and walked out of the council hall. The doors closed behind him with a soft hiss, but the sound felt louder than an explosion. The silence broke all at once. The chamber erupted into chaos. "The humans are bluffing," shouted a scaled governor from the southern cluster. His sharp teeth glistened as his tail whipped the floor. "They cannot survive outside our networks. They need us more than we need them." "They must be hiding something," whispered a soft-bodied elder, her glowing tendrils curling nervously. "They would not dare sever ties unless they had found allies elsewhere. What do they know that we don't?" "Send for them immediately," roared a thick-shelled commander, his voice booming like stone on metal. "We cannot allow this insult to stand. Summon their leaders, demand they explain themselves." The council chair slammed her staff on the floor, a long metallic clang that demanded silence. Even so, the room only quieted halfway. Fear and anger mixed too strongly. Leaders leaned toward each other, whispering in private tongues, their words too quick for the translators to keep up. Already the news had spread beyond the chamber. Across the galaxy, relay stations caught the ambassador's announcement and broadcasted it to every world. On distant colonies, screens flickered with the message, "Humanity cuts all ties with the Galactic Council." Ships in orbit replayed the clip again and again, crew members staring wide-eyed, uncertain whether to laugh or tremble. Back in the chamber, the panic deepened. Some feared this was the first step toward war. Others worried about the economy. Humans had built trade fleets that touched every sector, carried food, medicine, and weapons. If they pulled back, shortages would erupt within weeks. Small planets would starve. Pirate clans would rise again. Borders once safe under joint patrols would become weak. And yet, not everyone took it seriously. One tall avian leaned back in his seat, feathers slicked with arrogance. "Humans are dramatic creatures. They will return once they realize how alone they are. No one survives long without the council." But his words sounded hollow, even to himself. For deep down, every leader knew the truth. Humans were not as dependent as they seemed. They had always adapted faster than expected, survived harsher worlds, and turned weaknesses into strengths. If they were cutting ties now, it meant they had already prepared for what came next. The council chair tried again to bring order. "We must remain calm. Send a formal message to Earth at once. Ask them to reconsider. Remind them of the benefits of cooperation." But the chamber had already lost its balance. Dozens of voices shouted over each other. Some demanded to send fleets to Earth and force the humans back into line. Others begged for patience, afraid that provoking them would lead to disaster. Somewhere in the back rows, an older alien with pale skin muttered, almost to himself, "I warned you all. I told you they would not stay slaves forever." His words went unheard under the storm of arguments, but they lingered in the air like smoke. Meanwhile, outside the chamber, the human ambassador walked calmly through the polished halls. Guards and assistants of other species watched him pass, stunned. No one dared to stop him. No one dared to speak. He carried no weapon, only the weight of a decision that had shaken the galaxy to its core. When his shuttle lifted off from the council station, hundreds of eyes followed its trail through the windows. A small vessel, quiet and unarmed, but in that moment it looked like the most dangerous ship in the galaxy. Inside the chamber, the council's panic had grown into a storm. Some shouted to cut off Earth from all supplies, to punish them until they begged to return. Others shook their heads, knowing punishment would only harden the humans further. A few suggested reaching out in secret, trying to bribe or flatter them back into the fold. But no matter what they said, no matter what plans they made, the fact remained humanity had walked away. The chamber did not rest after the humans' departure. All through the night, the council tower buzzed with shouts, private messages, and secret meetings. The hallways that usually echoed with calm footsteps now carried frantic voices in dozens of alien languages. Each delegate feared what the sudden silence from Earth truly meant. Inside the central chamber, the council chair called for an emergency session. Leaders who had not even returned to their homeworlds rushed back to their seats, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but their minds restless. The chair's voice cut across the noise. We must address this crisis before panic spreads to every corner of the galaxy. The word crisis was enough to set the room boiling again. One commander with metallic arms pounded the table, sparks jumping from his claws. Humans cannot be allowed to embarrass the council. If they wish to leave, then we must make an example of them. An example? Screeched an avian noble, feathers puffed in outrage. They provide half the patrol fleets that guard the frontier. If they vanish, pirates will tear the borders apart. You would risk chaos just to save your pride? Others shouted over them. Block their trade lanes, send warships, offer them double the seats, force their colonies into sanctions. No one agreed. The chamber shook with noise, each word filled with fear. In a quiet corner, the delegate of a small farming world spoke in a trembling voice. If they cut trade, our people will not survive winter. Humans supply the food our soil cannot grow. What do we tell our children if their ships never return? The chair raised her staff again, but this time the clang did not silence the chamber. Fear had gripped too many hearts. For every voice demanding punishment, there was another begging for compromise. For every leader who thought humans were bluffing, there was one who feared they meant every word. Messengers entered carrying data pads. Reports flowed in faster than the council could read them. Markets collapsing on distant planets, merchants reporting that human fleets had already changed their routes, colonies reporting shortages after only a single day. An elder with silver eyes tapped his claws slowly on the table. His words were low but clear. We built our empire on the belief that humans would never walk away. Now they have, and we do not know if we can survive without them. The chamber went quiet at last, but it was not peace. It was the silence of a wound that no one could close. The panic had settled deep. No agreement could be reached. Every delegate looked toward Earth's empty seat, once ignored, now carrying more weight than all the rest combined. And in that silence, every leader knew the same truth, but dared not say it aloud. The galaxy had just shifted, and they no longer understood where the center of power truly lay. Months before the announcement, tension had been rising like a storm no one wanted to see. In every council session, humans were spoken to last, their concerns brushed aside as if their words carried no weight. They asked for fairer taxes on their colonies, but the request was ignored. They argued against new trade restrictions, yet the laws passed anyway. Even when pirates struck human convoys, the council delayed its response, offering excuses while human lives were lost. The insults did not stop in the chambers. Across the stars, certain species mocked humanity openly. Human merchants were forced to pay higher docking fees, their scientists were denied access to researcher stations, and their soldiers were called reckless savages in the press. What stung most was not the abuse itself, but the silence of supposed allies who pretended not to hear. On Earth, anger brewed quietly. At first, leaders sent polite letters asking for fairness. When those failed, they tried diplomacy, but every message returned with the same cold answer. Wait your turn. You are not important enough. A human senator stood in their chamber and warned, they are building a cage around us. His words spread like fire among the people. The final insult came in secret. A leak revealed private council files, plans to restrict human expansion permanently, to place limits on how many colonies they could found, how many warships they could build, even how far they could travel without permission. The words were simple but cruel. Contain them before they grow too strong. When the news reached Earth, protests filled the streets. Colonists refused to pay council taxes. Merchants pulled their ships from foreign ports. In the Outer Rim, human fleets began training alone, drills that no one outside was invited to watch. For the first time in generations, Earth spoke with one voice. Inside the chambers of power, leaders met behind closed doors. Some argued to stay, to endure the insults until humanity was stronger. Others demanded immediate withdrawal, calling every day under the Council's flag a humiliation. The arguments grew heated, but all knew a choice had to be made. One night, long before the stars rose over the capital, the human president signed the order. Ambassadors would return. Consulates would close. No more treaties, no more meetings. Humanity would walk away. The message was sealed, ready to be delivered not with anger but with finality. From that moment, silence spread through Earth's command halls. It was the silence of a people who had finally accepted the cost of freedom. On the distant world of Yeroth, where 3 suns burned across a sky of orange clouds, citizens gathered in the central square to watch the broadcast. The words of the human ambassador repeated again and again on giant crystal screens. Some laughed, waving their claws as if dismissing a child's tantrum. Others whispered with unease, remembering the human fleets that once defended their shipping lanes. Traders rushed to sell off human-made goods before prices collapsed, while families worried what would happen when the food shipments stopped. On the icy moons of the Drakari, soldiers in black armor filled their barracks with laughter. They mocked humanity as weak, predicting that Earth would crawl back within weeks. Yet their commanders stayed quiet, staring at maps that showed empty patrol routes, vulnerable sectors where pirates would soon move. The bravado of the soldiers hid the tension no one dared speak aloud. On smaller colonies, far from the council's core, panic was not hidden at all. Farmers cried in markets when human freighters never arrived. Dockyards stood silent, waiting for ships that had already turned homeward. In mining outposts, workers demanded to know if their wages would be paid without the credits that came through human trade. Alien broadcasters filled the channels with debates. One voice shouted that humans were selfish traitors. Another warned that the galaxy had grown too comfortable leaning on their ships, their machines, their soldiers. Each night the arguments grew hotter, and each morning the uncertainty deepened. Among merchants, chaos struck hardest. Human fleets carried not just goods but security. Without them, smugglers and raiders began testing the borders. Rumors of attacks spread like wildfire. Insurance companies refused to cover journeys. Trade slowed, and entire economies shook. In palaces and high towers, rulers sat in silence, their advisors scrambling with numbers and desperate plans. Some sent secret messages toward Earth, hoping to buy private deals. Others hardened their voices in public, swearing the council could replace humanity with ease. But even in those proud speeches, there was a crack of doubt, a fear that no replacement would come. And through it all, the ordinary citizens across countless worlds asked the same question as they looked up at the stars. What if the humans never return? Inside Earth's command centers, the atmosphere was nothing like the chaos of the Council. The great glass halls of the United Terran Assembly glowed with quiet determination. Ambassadors from across the stars had returned home, their ships touching down one by one, greeted not with shame but with cheers. Families held signs welcoming them back, as if they were heroes returning from a war. For many, that was exactly what it felt like, the end of a long war of humiliation fought with words instead of weapons. In orbit, human fleets moved with precision. Ships that once patrolled distant borders now gathered around Earth and its colonies. Engineers worked without pause, retrofitting freighters into armored carriers, adding weapons where trade goods had once been stored. Every shipyard burned with activity, sparks showering the night as vessels rolled out faster than ever before. From above, the view was unmistakable. Humanity was preparing. On the colonies, life changed overnight. Flags of the council were lowered and folded away. Children learned new pledges in school, repeating words of independence. Farmers, once taxed by the council until their profits vanished, now delivered food directly to human markets. The air was filled with both relief and fire. Relief that they no longer bowed to alien law, fire that came from finally being free to decide their own fate. In secret chambers beneath the assembly, leaders discussed plans that no outsider could hear. Maps glowed on the walls, showing hidden routes, untapped resources, and alliances not bound by council treaties. Whispers spread of human scientists unlocking technologies the council had banned, of weapons that had been kept in the dark, now ready to see light. What struck most was not anger, but unity. For the first time in generations, there were no rival parties pulling in different directions, no corporations pushing their own deals, no colonies arguing over privileges. They all shared one memory of being mocked, dismissed, and betrayed, and it had bound them tighter than any law ever could. When human news channels broadcast messages from the assembly, the tone was calm, never wild. Leaders spoke softly, promising strength and protection, never revenge. Yet behind every calm word was a steel edge the galaxy had never heard before. Humanity was not begging. Humanity was not apologizing. Humanity was done waiting. And in the quiet of Earth's capital, where the great towers rose above oceans, there was no panic, no doubt. There was only the steady heartbeat of a people who knew they had chosen their path and would never turn back. Envoys arrived at Earth in secret, their ships darkened, their banners hidden. They carried gifts of rare metals, technology once forbidden, even offers of entire star systems if humanity would return to the Council. But the human gates stayed closed. No response came from the assembly. Messages piled up unanswered, and envoys returned home with nothing but silence. In the council chamber, desperation grew heavier with each passing day. Delegates argued until their voices cracked. Some demanded warships be sent to force Earth back into line, but none volunteered their fleets to lead. Others pleaded for more patience, but patience had already cost them trade, food, and security. Each plan collapsed under the weight of fear. A grand assembly of the oldest species was called, a gathering that had not happened in centuries. They sat in a private circle, away from the lesser delegates, and spoke words they would never allow the public to hear. "We have lost control," one elder said. "The humans no longer need us, but we cannot survive without them." His words echoed through the chamber like a curse. Meanwhile, across the stars, common people felt the impact more than their rulers. Ships sat idle at docks with no fuel. Markets grew empty. Soldiers stationed on the rim waited for reinforcements that would never come. Panic turned to unrest. Protests rose on worlds that had once mocked humanity, citizens demanding their leaders fix what had been broken. Council leaders sent desperate broadcasts across the galaxy, assuring their people that negotiations were ongoing, that humanity would return. But those words were hollow, and everyone knew it. Traders who had dealt with humans for years shook their heads. "If they say they are gone, then they are gone," one said. In back rooms, bribes were prepared, threats were whispered, alliances shifted. Yet, every attempt at pulling humanity back ended in failure. The silence from Earth grew louder than any words could. And in that silence, even the proudest rulers began to admit what they had never dared before. For the first time in history, the Council had no power over humanity. The leak spread like wildfire, faster than any official broadcast could control. Files stolen from the Council's own vaults appeared on every channel, translated into dozens of tongues. The words were undeniable, secret plans to keep humanity chained forever. Directives to slow their expansion, to limit their colonies, to cut their fleets before they grew too strong. Even worse, there were signed agreements between species, laughing at human ambition, calling them useful tools and second-class citizens of the stars. Across alien worlds, shock turned into fury. Ordinary people who had trusted their leaders felt betrayed. How many other species had been tricked in the same way? Protests exploded outside council halls, angry crowds demanding to know why humans had been treated like slaves behind closed doors. Some threw human flags into the air as symbols of support. Others shouted that if humans had been caged, perhaps their own species was next. In the council chambers, chaos was no longer just noise, it was collapse. Leaders accused each other, denying signatures, claiming forgery, but the evidence was too clear. Every file carried seals and voices they could not deny. The chamber that once ruled the galaxy now looked like a den of guilty thieves scrambling to hide from the light. On Earth, the leak only fueled unity. Crowds filled the streets, not with fear, but with pride. At last, the truth the people had long suspected was revealed to everyone. No one spoke of returning. No one begged for peace. Instead, they demanded strength, demanded independence, demanded the right to grow without chains. In distant colonies, human fleets lifted off with cheers from the ground. No longer patrols under council command, they now flew the banner of Earth alone. And to the billions watching across the stars' eye, those ships looked less like fleets and more like a rising storm. The council's most powerful voices tried to issue new statements, swearing regret, promising reforms, begging for another chance. But each word sounded like weakness, and each plea only reminded the galaxy who held the power now. What had begun as silence had become something far greater: humanity's truth, unchained and undeniable, echoing across every world until even their enemies whispered the same fear. Humans were no longer beneath them. They had been betrayed, and now nothing could predict what they would do next. The broadcast came without warning. Every channel, every relay, every screen across the galaxy flickered at once. For a moment, static filled the air, then the image of Earth's assembly chamber appeared. No grand music, no dramatic banners, only a single human standing at a podium, their face calm, their voice steady. The words carried to every corner of space in every tongue at once. Humanity will not return to the council. We will not kneel. We will not ask permission to grow. We will not be ruled by those who see us as lesser. From this day forward, we are sovereign. We seek no war, but we will not tolerate chains. To those who respect us, we will meet you as equals. To those who test us, remember, patience is over. The speech ended there. No threats, no demands, no bargaining. The transmission cut, and the stars were silent. On council worlds, leaders sat frozen, staring at dark screens. The proud ones who had laughed at humans for years felt the weight of fear pressing on their chests. They understood then what the silence had meant all along. Humanity had never needed them, but they had always needed humanity. On distant colonies, riots paused as citizens watched the message. For many, it felt less like an ending and more like the first breath of something new. If humans could rise, then perhaps anyone could. For the first time in centuries, hope sparked where there had only been obedience. In Earth's skies, fleets moved with perfect coordination, ships gleaming in the light of their sun. No longer patrols for another's borders, they formed walls of steel around their own. Behind those walls, factories burned with energy, laboratories worked without restriction, and entire generations looked outward to the stars with fire in their eyes. In the council chambers, the silence grew unbearable. No one dared to speak, because every delegate knew the truth. The galaxy had shifted. The center of power was no longer inside the council's hall, but far away, on a blue world that had once begged to be heard. And now that world had spoken, not with pleas, not with threats, but with finality. The humans were gone, and they were not coming back.